Okay, guys, well, I'm trying something new. I got my selfie stick out, so this is going to make class, I think, slightly more exciting. You get this kind of big air. I can do bigger things like this. I feel a little more like I'm in my element here. We can do some complex spinning camera insanity. Okay, so welcome back. I look a little like I got like these like Tony Stark glasses. I'm kind of feeling it right now, actually. So this will allow me to do, oh, that's good. I can walk around. Oh, this is nice. Okay. So welcome back to class. This is English 250, Introduction to Literary Studies. Um, and we've been over Wordsworth, and then I gave The Gravediggers as an example of the kind of thing Wordsworth is talking about. So what I'm going to do today, which will be a little more, as we're doing another philosopher, we're moving on. So Wordsworth, we're done with Wordsworth. We are in the art and authors section of the class. And Wordsworth began that because it began the section of class that we're in. Wordsworth's whole point is that we are when you read the work of art, what you're getting to know is the author's personal emotions on the page. Um, the next guy I'm bringing you is a guy named Harold Bloom. Now, Harold Bloom is an important person to me personally. Harold Bloom died back in October. And when he died in October, by the way, I'm so obsessed with Harold Bloom am I that when he died, I randomly had one of his books with me at the time. I was out of the house. I was at a wedding, and I had his book. Yeah, I brought a book to a wedding. You know, whatever. That's what I do. So I had one of his books with me. That's how important Harold Bloom is to me. I've written 4 books. Basically, 2 of them are entirely based off of the philosophy of Harold Bloom that I'm about to tell you about today. My film class, if you take that with me next semester, is entirely based off Harold Bloom's literary theory. Oscar Wilde is maybe my favorite of the theorists, but Harold Bloom is the guy that I used the most in my own writing. Oh boy, this is so much more dynamic. This is great. I love the ability to walk around like this. So Harold Bloom is sort of extra key to what I am doing here in my classes and in all of my stuff. And I think you'll see, and also Harold Bloom will also give you the secret to why I study so much Shakespeare. So and he is, by the way, one of the major things he does is he's a Shakespeare scholar. He does other stuff too, romantic poetry. He studies guys like Wordsworth. Um, but we're going to go over sort of Harold Bloom's philosophy today. Now, I will say one of the ironies of my career is that while Harold Bloom is my favorite, I often find him difficult to explain to students. He's a little tough to kind of let students know about because his vocabulary and the way that he writes is this bonkers. It's almost like you're reading a religious book, and he's a really an odd writer, and you'll see that when we look at his writing. Also, I will admit that the section of writing that I took for Harold Bloom is maybe not the easiest to understand, and I probably could have gone with something simpler. And one of the things I might have done is change that. But with the COVID and all of this stuff, I didn't have a chance. So we're pretty much stuck with the 2 pages of Harold Bloom I got. We were going to be ignoring actually quite a bit of that because what I'm going to want to do is just look at a handful of sentences to kind of get it. So without further ado, let's take a look at Harold Bloom. So I'm going to try doing this. Okay. So this is Harold Bloom's Anxiety of Influence. Actually, I'm going to say more personal shit. When I was like 20, I got this book. Harold Bloom's books, by the way, his major books about this subject, which is called The Anxiety of Influence. They're about 80 pages long, so if you feel so compelled to read more Harold Bloom, it's relatively easy to do that. The books aren't super long. They're hard to read. They're tricky and they're complex, but they're very short. But this book changed my life. When I read this book, I was like, oh shit, this is art. And it's the most useful thing I've found for understanding art. But it's my personal favorite. Everybody has their own little, favorite philosophers, and this guy is mine. And this is the first semester I'm teaching it since he died, which is extremely sad. So, all right, let's take a look at Harold Bloom. Okay. So the book is called The Anxiety of Influence. In the first sentence here, he says poetic history. And remember, whenever we talk about poetry, what he's talking about is really all art everywhere. He says poetic history, in this book's argument, is held to be indistinguishable from poetic influence, since underline this, strong poets make that history by misreading one another, so as to clear imaginative space for themselves. Poetic influence. Strong poets make history by misreading one another so as to clear imaginative space
for themselves. What follows here, you see these numbered, the number 1 through 6 there, what follows there, and I'm probably going to skip most of that because it's kind of impossible. But what follows there are these weird terms that he's made up. They're really bonkers. It's not my favorite part of his book. But the terms that he's made up are essentially he's they're I gotta back up. This is hard. It's hard to explain Harold Bloom. So for Harold Bloom, my students are often, I think, bothered by Harold Bloom because they think Harold Bloom has a funny way of defining what originality is. It's a thing that bothers my students. When I tell you what he believes, what you're going to hear is no one is original. There's no such thing as originality. Everybody is ripping everybody else off. And there's no such thing as original thought. And that is not true. That's wrong. Please do not think that. That is not Harold Bloom's point. But he defines originality in an extremely unusual way, and it really throws people. So Harold Bloom says, and we can go back right back to that first sentence to kind of get a sense of his main point, because it's right there in the first sentence. Poetic influence. Strong poets make history by misreading one another so as to clear imaginative space for themselves. What Harold Bloom believes is that every single major work of art is a twist on some earlier work of art. Now, you will hear, you just heard me say, there's no such thing as originality, nobody's original, everybody's ripping everybody else off. No. Harold Bloom says what originality is, his definition of being original, is having the most interesting, unusual, intelligent twist on something that came before. He believes it's the original guys are the ones who twist earlier works of art in fascinating ways. The terrible, the really bad writers are the ones that just copy and repeat. What a bad writer just does what somebody else does. What a good writer takes what, we usually say a bad writer just takes what somebody else does and repeats it, and a good writer invents his own thing. Harold Bloom says a bad writer takes what something somebody else does and repeats it, but a good writer takes what somebody else does and twists it and builds it into something new. Why do they do this? Harold Bloom says, and you may have felt this before. If you're a creative writer, I think you may respond to this. If you've ever been a creative writer and you want to make a movie, you have all these ideas maybe for stories and movies and stuff, and you ever sit down to write something and you start it and you're like, man, this has been done before. Man, you ever get frustrated? Sometimes it feels like before you were born, everybody had all the good ideas, and now there's nothing for you to do. Like any movie idea you've got seems like a movie that's already been made, and every story idea you've got seems like a story that someone's already told. And Harold Bloom says that's how everybody feels. That's how great artists feel like that everything's already been done. And what they have to do is they have to find new space for themselves to do something new. And when they do that, what they do is they take something old and they twist it. Harold Bloom's a little hard to explain to students because what in your papers and in this class, we have like one work of art we're looking at, right? We're looking at Hamlet in the class, and you guys will look at one work of art and a philosopher in your papers. But for Harold Bloom, you always need two works of art, because for Harold Bloom, what his philosophy demands that you do is that you take a look at how any work of art is a twist or an imaginative recreation of an older work of art. So you always need two works of art, because if you ask what does this work of art means, you have to find what it's building off of and then describe how it got from here to here. And the word he uses for that is an incredibly unusual and weird word, but he says misreading. He says it's misreading. And that's a funny thing to say, because usually when you think about misreading, you think about just making the error, like you read that word wrong. But for Harold Bloom, you are misreading on purpose. You read something, some book somebody's already written, you watch a movie, and then you misinterpret it. You come up with a weird interpretation that is wrong. That is not what was in the original, but you sort of have a funny interpretation of it, and that weirdo interpretation is your new work of art. Every work of art is a twist on a previous work of art. So I'll get back to you with some examples when I finish this video. I'm really digging this exciting perspective. This is very cool. Okay, yeah.